Alright, welcome back to the channel everyone. My name's Actually, if you don't know who I am, I'm just starting my second year of medicine at Imperial College London, and if you clicked on this video, you probably want to find out about the Imperial College Medical School interview. So most of you will probably be at that stage, so well done for getting to the interview stage. So I'm going to give you exactly what happened on my day, sort of what happened, what it's like, and the general layout, and then I'm going to also spend some time talking about some tips and some advice that might help you in the future when you're sitting this interview. So if that sounds good, the timestamps will be down below in the description, and also if you want to skip to any part, you can do that as well. I won't be offended. And yeah, please do subscribe. Also, if you haven't subscribed already, I believe we're close to that milestone. But if you haven't subscribed, it would really make my day if you could just hit that red button down below. Apart from that rambling, let's get straight into the video. Okay, so let's contextualize this a little bit. So I sat my Imperial MMI in 2019 and around the winter Christmas period. So I sat mine pretty early in the grand scheme of things. Most interviews tend to take place around February, March, but mine was a little bit early. I don't know why that was, it just was. Which is sort of unlucky, but also a little bit lucky because you get to finish your interviews off nice and early and you can focus on other stuff later on. You don't have to, panic. I had a little bit of time to do preparation. Now, in terms of the actual day, mine was physical, so I went to campus because this was pre-COVID, so before the entire virus basically, crapped on the entire world. I went to the campus and I was basically told to wait in a big hall, a big area, and there were a lot of other applicants there too, and we were all obviously pretty much bricking it. So we were then called at about, I'd say, 10:30 or 11. I can't even remember the timings, I'm lying to you. But we were called at some point, and what happened was we were taken to a little room where there were about 15 of us, and there was one mentor slash student slash lecturer, and basically explained to us what was going to happen. And we were then taken into a room, and now this is the basic format, so I'll take you to a little bit of a screen up here. Now the format for the Imperial MMI were about 7 to 8 stations. Now they were laid out in a little hall, so there were 2 columns I'd say, or 2 rows, how you want to look at it, and each had about 4 to 5 stations. So we basically had dividers between each station, and it helped because obviously you can get distracted and you didn't know what anyone else was talking about, and it was pretty close, it was pretty small, sort of cozy area. It wasn't really big, and they were all in the same sort of cubicle area, which meant that, it was easy to move around between interviews and it didn't feel so tense. Because obviously if you're going between rooms for different stations, it can feel a little bit anxious and it feels a little bit more, okay, I'm seriously doing an interview. Whereas the Imperial MMI was more sort of cozy, a little bit smaller, and they just made it a lot easier for you to get into the grip of things, and they made it very informal. So what happened was we had stations which were labeled to us on the outside, so it would say MI/work experience or MMI/ethics, MMI/personal statement, and so on and so on. So we had, a rough idea of what they were going to ask us before we went into the interview stage. Now, I can't tell you what questions they asked me because I'd probably get kicked out of my medical school, which is not the most ideal situation for myself, so I'm going to try and avoid that by being a little bit more vague about this and just giving you some general information. So, in terms of what we were asked, it was all pretty simple. There were no sort of weird questions that you can get asked, like, can you wash my feet? Or can you tell me how many air molecules there are in this closed can of Diet Coke? None of that weird questions that you might get asked in Oxbridge interviews, I hear. But at Imperial, it's all very standard. You get, your normal interview questions, there's questions that you'll be coming across in your online practice and prep, and it's all very sort of standard. So there's nothing too complicated about it, and I think people big up Imperial because obviously it's a really difficult university to get into, but for some reason the MMI isn't the most challenging thing, and people tend to just overthink it. So if you just basically come to the Imperial MMI with a very sort of, I think the best thing to do is just to come to Imperial with a very open mind and to have done the basics really well, and just to really attend as yourself. And if you just do that, it's really easy to do well in this MMI. Now, so let's move on to some tips. Number 1, I'd say just to do the basics well. It's really important in Imperial's MMI to basically be able to understand every station. The lists of stations are available somewhere on Imperial's website anyway, so they already give you this information, but it's just to be able to understand them and to come equipped with some basic preparation. And these are already the basics you should be doing for any MMI, and people tend to overthink a little bit and maybe revise too much science or revise too much on ethics and come with a lot of facts and figures, and it comes across really robotic. And I guess that's one thing that Imperial are really trying to avoid, because the more robotic you sound, the less genuine you sound. And what we really want to see, or what Imperial I would assume want to see, are people who genuinely are interested in what they're talking about. People who haven't come, with loads of data and facts and information about, you know, how many NHS doctors work in primary care versus how many NHS doctors work, you know, internationally. You know, people don't want to know that information. People want to know your opinions, what you think, how you think. And in fact, what's actually more likely to happen is that they'll give you facts and figures and they'll ask you to debate these things. Now, you're not expected to know these things, you're not expected to understand any of it, but what you are expected to do is to use your critical skills, your analytical skills that you hopefully have developed through 6 years of schooling or 10 years of schooling or whatever, and be able to apply that to pieces of information that you just don't know. So that's really all it is at Imperial, and I guess if that's something you struggle with, it's worth trying to put some effort into it and being able to do these things, you know, work on your UCAT, your BMAT, being able to learn common theories and applying it. So I guess that's the best thing that you can do. And the second thing I would say is to make sure you do have some preparation. They're going to ask you about your personal statement, they're going to ask you about your work experience, they're going to ask you about your ethics knowledge. You know, these are basically things that they will ask you about. So I would say that yes, you don't want to come across robotic, but you've also got to have some basic information. So that might sound a little bit conflicting and a little bit vague, but it's all about being able to understand what you need to know and what you don't need to know. These things also, you'll have to know a little bit of knowledge to act as a prerequisite almost. So your work experience, if you did it at an old age home, they might expect you to have some basic information about dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc. If you did a club, you know, if you played, I don't know, rugby, they might ask you a little bit about what you did there. So don't rock up to the interview purely expecting to be able to apply 0% of knowledge, because you've got to have something in your head being able to bring out to the interview. But you also don't want to have too much information, and it's really difficult to find the balance of what you do need to know and what you don't need to know. The best way I say to do for your personal statement, for example, is to explain to someone who's never seen your personal statement before. If you can explain to them in enough detail so that they get a pretty good sort of summary of what you've done, you know, that's enough information. And if they understand it really well, that's an additional plus, because what you want to be able to do is to explain things that you've done, apply them, even manipulate the things that you've done, your experiences, you know, your hobbies and everything, and make sure that you can apply it to these unknown situations, which is what essentially an MMI station is. It's an unknown situation that you've been thrown into, and hopefully that sort of sheds some light on what it's like. Now, I guess the final thing that people always want to know is, what do they ask you? And I can't say that because, like I said, I've come too far to get kicked out of medical school for distributing this kind of knowledge. But what I will say is this: a lot of people spend way too much time worrying and focusing on what they're going to ask you, the exact questions, and I always say, stop worrying, because they could literally change the question like that. There's no list of questions that they have. They ask you things based on who you are. If you come across as somebody who's got bags of experience, bags of volunteering, they're probably going to ask you that. If you're somebody who's clearly, you know, got not very little volunteering, very little work experience, you know, not great grades, but you've got some desire there, you've got good grit, and you really want to do medicine, they're going to ask you about it. They're going to ask you, despite your challenges, you know, that you may have faced in your work experience of volunteering, the minimal, you know, amount you may have, how is it that they can still give you a place? You know, they're going to ask you things that clearly are there about yourself. So I always try and say to make sure that you're targeting all of your questions towards yourself as a person. Make sure that you're targeting the weak spots in your personal statement, the strong points in your personal statement, and don't just try and find previous questions that they've asked in previous years, because 9 times out of 10 they're not going to ask you those questions, because what's the point? You know, then people are just going to write those questions and it's not going to be an MMI, it's just going to be who can prepare the best, and you know, nobody wants to know that. So I always say to make sure you're targeting your practice towards your personal statement, towards the unique points about yourself, and you will do absolutely okay. You won't need to worry about anything. That's all you need to do. Do not ask people what they had in previous interviews. It doesn't help anyone, doesn't help them, doesn't help you, doesn't help the interviewer. I anticipate there may be more questions, and if there are, the comment section is always open for your questions, queries, advice, anything you want to. Feel free to scatter that down below somewhere and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Also, my Instagram is, you know, here, I'll put it on the screen so you can contact me there. My DMs are open, I reply to everyone because not many people message me. And also, if you haven't subscribed, feel free to subscribe down below also if you enjoy the video. Like it as well, because, you know, apparently that helps the algorithm. And yeah, I will catch you all in a bit. So yeah, see you later.